I was going to say it's been one of those weeks where, it's just good to be able to take this time and just kind of rethink some of our priorities and look back on what it is that we're learning and then being able to pass along. Of course, everything that we pass along to those who are listening to us is based on our experience, not on you must do this. Yeah, we love it when we hear from people who watch our podcasts or listen to our podcasts and give us feedback. So, what's your week been like?
The same. I've had a new project launch, and I have some ongoing projects, and I'm ramping down on a couple others. So it's just the regular cadence of a professional project manager, but I am doing some advisory work here too.
And the nice thing about this is that we are both active in our professions. And so therefore, a lot of what we can help our audience with is fresh, it's new, we make mistakes, we have victories, and we get to share all of that with our audience.
We talked earlier this week before the show about what we wanted to talk about, and we're basically out of the forecasting mindset, and now we're starting to get back to clean up the tasks that a project manager does. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was, even before the project is approved, you start looking at it and you start saying, what's the good approach to this? And what are the great tools I should be using? So I thought this would be something good. It's more of a strategic look at project management from the eyes of a mature project manager.
Well, and that kind of fits with my entire career, what you just described, because we're talking about assessing project needs, assessing sort of scope and budget and all that sort of thing, even before we begin the project, right? I still remember this story sticks in my mind like it's one of those that you wish you could relive, but we were bidding on a very, very large project for one of the Western states. And there is no way that we could come up against the incumbent on other aspects of this particular department within the state. There's no other way we could compete with them at their level. They were entrenched, they did things well, but this was a unique area that we wanted to get into. And so what we did was we assessed what the requirements were. But in doing that assessment, we decided to bid a very bleeding edge process. So if you think about this, we did assess the project needs, but in our hope to win, in looking at a whole brand new technology that was not out there, we didn't assess our client's risk tolerance. And yes, what we bid would have worked, and it was much cheaper than what the incumbent bid. But the State Department was unwilling to take the risk on this bleeding edge technology. So I think from that perspective, assessment of project needs comes from a multitude of areas. In this case, it was also their risk tolerance.
And as a consultant, you go into an organization with almost no knowledge. And exactly. you have to hit the ground running. It's running with your eyes and your ears open. Walk over to the coffee station if you're visiting your client's company. Look at what's on the bulletin board beside the occupational safety and health stuff, and see what the culture is like, and see if they have any documents that say this is our project life cycle. These little things that actually jump out at you that really shouldn't, that are just part of the noise of the background, can be very telling for what they're going to use, not necessarily the objective and the deliverable, but what they're going to use to assess what they call project success.
Oh, and all of those things are important. The unfortunate part in the situations that we bid into, once the request for proposal, or the RFP in our parlance, once that was let, we weren't allowed on the premises. So it would be great to be able to run into people at the coffee shop, but if you did, you were in danger of being disqualified. So
right.
There's all of that sort of thing. But think about, as we're thinking about this and looking at it from and let's just do it from a major project perspective. But in terms of the project assessment before you engage the team, what do you look for? What do you personally look for? What does your team look for, Tim?
So from if I have a new account, I'm starting from the ground up. You know, are they using templates? Do they have some centralized, standardized approach to work? Of course, you know, the contract terms and conditions have to fit within contract law, and we all have to abide by that. But once you get beyond that, you know, you're getting into the area that talks about policy and standard inside the corporation, and that's quite different. I look for the buzzwords. You know, do they use the words that are traditionally part of, you know, a standard project management framework, or are they describing things more from a functional or a system manner? Or are they talking about things from a sprint manner and a multiple release manner? And basically it's alignment of their culture and language and behavior with what I know is good practice.
Yeah, those are all exactly what the kinds of things that we looked at as well whenever we bid. Of course, we would look at budget if they published a budget. Otherwise, you'd kind of have to feel your way into what that budget might look like. But it's interesting, you know, when you look at it, sometimes we get a request for proposal and you'd read it and they'd put all of the onus on client experience, on end user usability, on all of these things, and yet then the RFP language was written from an IT perspective. Mm-hmm. And so then you'd look at it and say, yes, I can see that with their mouth, with the words on paper, they're saying the user is important. But what they're really telling us is that we need to pay homage to the IT guys in order to be able to assess this properly. So yeah, there's all sorts of clues and nuances and everything else in terms of assessing on as to whether you would go and take that job.
Oh yeah, I remember this doing this well too. I was not just doing a lot of data centers in the early to mid 2000s. I was also working with what you call PC fleet management, IT service management and help desk operations and centralization, as well as break fix and patch management, doing it remotely and automating it. And I would run into that often too. And there's a big red light that would go off in my head. I was lucky to have trainers who drilled this type into me that said, you know, if you have this dissonance of culture and language, there's something that is a risk in itself that's the root cause. And more often than not, I discovered over the next few years that the needs were understood by the client's technologists, but the expectations may not have been exposed. And that's where it's tricky. And you do need to work really directly and closely with the stakeholders, because they don't even know that they have something that's important for you.
Well, and sometimes it becomes a co-education where you're bringing them along and they're bringing you along, and then all of a sudden you have some of those aha moments in terms of
in the best of all worlds. That's when you know you have true success and also true innovation.
So I spoke from my experience as a consultant bidding into a job, and then upon winning it, then moving forward. But if I'm in-house, if I'm the in-house IT project manager, I don't necessarily have a choice as to what my next project is if the CIO comes down and says, we will do this. So does the assessment take on a different flavor for that IT project manager?
So let's do it stepwise, okay? Let's look at the documentation and the infrastructure needed to make a decision. And then let's look at the relationship level. And then let's look at the business and function level. So from a documentation standpoint, totally agree with you. Totally different creatures. You don't normally need the formal documentation between organizations, although I have seen some very mature corporations that actually do things like treat each business unit as its own corporation. And so they had to use journal vouchers to move money between businesses. And when you start doing that, you have to create these trust documents. They're not necessarily a contract per se, but there's some commitment and obligation between the organizations that says, yeah, I'm putting up good money for this, and you're putting up good work, and we'll do an exchange.
I think the other thing that I would look at as an IT project manager, supposedly as being, because I'm in-house, I know something of the business that my organization is doing, right? That I understand what it is that we're trying to do with this new system that we're going to be rolling out. But what I would look at is, do I have in-house skills? Do I have the staff that can carry on? Do I have to start hiring people? Let's just say that my organization wants a new system, and oh, by the way, there's this new thing called Agile, and we're going to use Agile. Do I now start looking for people who have Agile, or do I take 3 or 4 months and bring in experts to teach my staff Agile? So there's all of these processes that go into assessing, but here's the question behind the question. If we never assessed up front, how much success would we have in our ongoing projects?
Yeah, we need that bottom line assessment. Let me give you a great experience. Okay. I was a participant. I wasn't a project manager in this, but I was a decision maker at a certain level. This was a portfolio, and a corporation was rolling out a new product. Okay. And they had the chief of sales, basically the chief sales officer. He was a vice president. And we went to him, and we're doing some early requirements identification. And the vice president said, "You're working on a new product. What are the revenue targets for it?" And we said, "Oh, 9 million for the next 3 years, year over year." And he said, "No, I deal with the billions. I don't deal with the millions. So don't even bring that to my sales team." Well, the problem was we had fun with the marketing of this product, and the sales team got wind of this from their clients and the consumers. And so here we are 6 weeks before launch, and we have 5,000 sales reps at our front door and saying, "Knock, knock, knock. Where's my prototype that I can show my clients?" And we got caught with our pants down. But luckily, the development team and the product owner were brilliant. They took an early prototype, and they were able to, over a weekend, develop a simple product that demonstrated what it was able to do. And sales was happy. We were relieved, and it didn't impact the budget too much. But you don't have those type of wins very often. But
Right.
but again, it's that assessment that actually does it. And it's more, I hate to say this because we say it every week, it's more of a relationship activity than a documentation. It's understanding the environment and the interaction between the people and the work, with the business as well as within the product and the project.
Yeah, it's certainly all of that. I know I've been in situations where the commitment was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So the assessment was more than, can we do this? The assessment required a formal feasibility study, a formal cost benefits analysis, a formal return on investment analysis. And as a result of that, then and only then would you decide to go ahead with the project, or perhaps scale it down or do something else. But when you're dealing with real world dollars and real world time and real world competition with your competitors, then that few weeks or months that it takes to do a formal, proper assessment and document the results is absolutely critical for your success.
Yeah, and you could actually quantify this. I played in the tens of millions, so between $20 and $40 million project, right? Our clients were willing to spend $50,000 to $65,000 to create a formal project charter, to make the decision, yes or no. And then that would take about 3 experts, 4 to 6 weeks, right? And then with a team of about 7 to 12 experts and technologists over the next 6 or 7 months, spend $500,000 putting together a plan. And that gave them the infrastructure and the guidance to actually create a really high level of success for the next 1.5 to 2 years.
Oh, absolutely critical. I had the good fortune of actually working with a large organization to put together their entire request for proposal. And we spent 1 full year just on feasibility and cost benefits and then documented that. Now, our documentation wasn't so much the project charter as it was an advanced planning document that laid out exactly how we would go forward, including the issuance of the request for proposal for system integrators to be able to bid on. So yeah, it was that important that we spent a year just preparing.
Oh yeah. And when you're dealing with the public and the state and federal government, they know the value of that effort. And they know what happens when you don't get this right.
So let's take this conversation to a slightly different topic. We've got, in this day and age, we've got all sorts of ways that we can tackle a particular problem to solve with IT. How do you do an assessment? How do you realize that certain projects are best with certain methodologies to be able to implement them?
We could spend hours talking about this from a life cycle standpoint, but let's start about the earliest. First of all, one of the things that you just said, is my client spending up to a year to try to understand the problem? Have they defined the problem? Is there an issue that they're trying to solve? And is this an issue they've solved in the past or not? If they've solved it in the past, great. Let's just use a plan and blow it out and make them happy. And that's a traditional project. If they've never solved it and they're still going through that churn, this is where you're going to do an adaptive model where you may want to do an incremental or iterative approach with them. And then basically, you can do a phased budget where you have these milestone assessments and also milestone payments so that everybody is staying on track and going on the right direction.
It's almost like each increment becomes its own proof of concept.
It's not a bad idea, especially when you're in the great unknown. And what is their strategy? They may know it from a corporate survival standpoint, but from a technology standpoint, how do they remain resilient with this? These people are dealing with really complex things. When it first starts off, it deals with all the little problems, moving from cash flow to profit, stabilizing their processes, getting less of a reliance on their superstars and more of a reliance on predictable behavior of their operations. And you can see this, right? But the more mature they are, the more of the simple problems they get out of the way. All of a sudden, we don't have just one complex problems, we have multiple ones. So it it seems that as corporations grow and mature, they still have need for predictive projects, but they're really in need of adaptive processes to handle these new problems they've never addressed before.
Yeah, and in fact, with my experience, as you know, most of mine has been with waterfall or predictive methodologies. One of the things that used to frustrate me about waterfall was the fact that on these large projects, there was a huge gap or a huge chasm between requirements definition and implementation, and such that you might even have a whole turnover of staff, such that by the time you implement, they're going, well, wait a minute, why did we come up with this idea? Who said this? No, it was one of your compatriots from 2 years ago. And so that used to frustrate me a little bit in terms of the fact that you went through these phases, and yes, you documented, but sometimes the end result was not what was wanted. But where it worked well for us in predictive was that you had a certain number of contractual requirements to meet. That is business needs that you had to meet. And so as a result of that, you had to complete the project if you were going to get paid for everything. I'm now working on a couple of agile projects. And when I look at those, that makes a lot more sense in terms of being able to have the implementation closer to the requirements definition. But what's frustrating is some organizations in doing agile decide that they still have the business needs, a full-fledged basket of business needs that have to be met. And so that kind of flies in the face of the agile methodologies that says, no, I do backlog grooming, I do a minimum viable product that I can get out there, I bring on other requirements after the fact. And so I think there's a happy medium for new projects somewhere in the middle of all of that.
So the ones, you're right. And the ones who have actually breached that chasm and successfully crossed the chasm from traditional to agile, and then finally merged them as one approach, are the ones that said it's not necessarily two sets of tools. I don't do a 90-degree turn and say now we're predictive and now we're agile. It's basically treating this whole work as one single toolkit and look at the individual pieces. Now, there's another part to this. Basically, what we can think about is that we're not necessarily changing the result or the deliverable. We're changing the way we're going about doing it. The problem is the way we work is often so entrenched in the culture. For a major project, it can be 9 to 12 months to help the organization or the corporation change their attitude about what the problem is, much less what deliverable we want, and then how we're going to get about doing it. And that takes almost as much effort as, the definition of the scope, schedule, cost and quality and risk.
And you're doing that while they're still performing their day jobs.
Oh,
so
dear.
they're already beat up from their day jobs, and then you're trying to introduce this new concept. But yeah, somewhere in the middle. And I'm gonna play with these ideas over the next few months in terms of how we can do a fixed priced, fixed set of requirements and be able to take the best of both worlds from both predictive and agile in terms of that.
You know what? I have some ideas. I think that would be a really interesting exercise.
I think it would be too.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Have you your experience is it largely predictive or largely adaptive as well?
7.5 years. It was a combination. It would start with the structure of the contract, but then when you go about ready to do the work, you'd have to think about training first. And this is something that I learned also, not just back when I was managing projects, but when I started, teaching projects, especially since 2015. The best practices around starting projects is the assessment of the of the competency needs and start the training from ground zero.
Yeah, and I think, based on my last kind of discourse in terms of there has to be a happy medium, I think there are opportunities when you're doing a large waterfall project to introduce iterative concepts that Agile allows. And I think, you and I have often talked about the smartphone. The smartphone, if someone had sat down and said, here are all the requirements for a smartphone, it might have taken 10, 15, 20 years to build that. But because they, remember the old flip phone, and they finally figured out you could text, like a B was, you had to hit the 2 key or whatever it was twice to get the B. How far have we come now where you can speak your texts? Imagine if someone had said from the get-go, we had to be able to speak our texts. That would have taken years possibly to get that done.
Exactly. And this is the thing. And this is going to help you understand how do we actually bring this adaptive mindset back into a predictive model. Here's the trick. When you're talking about phones, it's never been done before. People don't have expectations. And so one of the problems you have is, how can I express value from a limited set of functions in a product or service people think they really know everything about? It really does take a almost a total business mindset when you're trying to actually get these breakaway opportunities corporations want in a predictive landscape.
Well, and you and I have talked before, many times, I think, about common sense. Sometimes in the IT world, we do things and don't apply common sense. But as I was thinking about this, one of my very first projects when I came out of school was to work on a hospital financial management information system, HFMIS.
Mhm.
And it was interesting to really take this huge project on. I mean, it was everything from scheduling patient visits to scheduling beds to scheduling ORs to be able to do the accounts receivable, the general ledger, all of that, that goes into basically reworking the entire hospital financial management system. And it was a corporate group of about 9 or 10 hospitals. So to take that on with a predictive, back then that's all we had was waterfall and procedural languages, some of which, by the way, still were in assembler. The only way we could take this on was to chunk it up. And so, for example, if we built the accounts receivable functionality, we had to stitch it back into the general ledger, the old system. Then when we built the general ledger system, we stitched the general ledger to the new. So we did all of this in kind of chunking it up. Little did we know that we were applying hybrid agile concepts to a very large project. But how did we come to that conclusion? We used common sense.
See, this is the beautiful thing. I talk about this in my class. I'm trying to actually put together an argument that talks about what you're saying. And I don't want to spill the beans on this, but think about this. Adaptive is one of the best adjectives for agile and iterative and incremental projects. It's where, an individual piece may work on its own and does its own thing, and you can't really predict what it's going to do. Human beings also have this adaptive behavior. As individuals, we're random, but when we come together, we have this ability to actually find out that we have different specializations, and we learn real quickly to work as a team. General specialist and team-based is naturally the way humans behave. That's what's kept us surviving through 3 ice ages, right? This general specialization. And it blows my mind to think, if that's natural behavior, what do we call traditional project management?
Common sense? Could it be?
Well, actually, adaptive is common sense and part of the nature of how humans work. We did predictive projects because it was the formal structure of the organizations that we put in place. We had an adaptive method to put them in place. And then the formal structure was what said, we got to keep the business running. We have to measure, and we have to do things right.
And what's interesting is when I was reading the new emphasis within the PMBOK 7, the latest version, tailoring takes on a huge concept within the new version. And I was thinking, that's all we've ever done. I mean, we've done so many projects. We've always done tailoring to suit our client, to suit the business, we've always tailored.
Right. Just it's like the captain of a ship who makes tiny changes continually throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month to actually course correct. And we do this naturally as part of our work because the objective doesn't change. But maybe because of our near-term work and things that get exposed that we don't understand, we have to go around those obstacles, and then we have to come back and get back to our path.
Yeah. And as you were saying, human beings are very, very, very good at that. Did you ever get in a situation where you had to stop work on a project?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can honestly say that probably, I'm trying to think now, back in my career, and I've probably done 20 to, well, maybe 20 fairly good sized projects. I'm not sure that we had more than one work stoppage in all that time. But our incentive was a work stoppage often reflected badly on us as the contractor, less so on the client organization. And the reason for that is that we were basically going from job to job to job, and a lot of our jobs were won based on the previous client's references.
Yeah, and not only that, but you're going job to job to job within the same skill set. And so you didn't have to rely on your client, and they most probably structured the work such that they followed your advice instead of following what they wanted.
They did, and we also had fairly tight yet flexible, if I can say that, contract terms that held us both responsible for anything. So anyone could do a work stoppage, but there were penalties on either side for whoever called for the work stop, for wherever the blame would lay, basically. And so neither the client nor us wanted to get into a blame game ever. And so you try to always work your way through any kind of, and we had problems. I'm not saying we didn't have problems. Every project comes with its problems. Every project comes with disagreements. It's how you work through those disagreements to continue the work. And we're back to the relationship on the projects, aren't we?
Yeah, it's back to relationships. It's an understanding of, acceptable variation, and then having that careful conversation of, what does precision talk about, and what do you mean by precise? And, what are the rewards and penalties around precision or lack of that precision?
Yeah. The one that I do remember clearly was that the client insisted, and we had bid the project, but the client insisted, based on how they wanted to roll it out, on a certain architectural framework. I'm talking hardware architectural framework. And no matter how many times that we would try to convince them that the architecture was not the right architecture for this particular project, the client didn't want to hear it. And finally, we got to the point where in testing, we realized, and the client realized with us, that it was going to be a tough go with this architecture for this system. And so what ended up happening was we had a work stoppage or a work halt so that we could rejigger our approach to solving the problem. And of course, that puts a consulting organization, and I guess even an inside organization, in a world of hurt, because suddenly you've got all of these staff that are sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and you can't have that. You need to keep them productive. So you're always looking for places for them. So that was the unfortunate part, where in that case, the client did not want to be guided by us, felt they knew better because they were sold by the hardware manufacturer of how great this was, and then it didn't work out for us. But yeah, those, I'm happy to say, in my experience, were very rare.
So here's the question, okay? You're from a world of predictive waterfall, and that's where your success is, and you're successful over and over and over again. The question is, what would cause someone like you to actually say, we need an adaptive approach, not just it's nice to play with and let's do agile for a little bit to understand it, but really it's part of the success criteria? Because if I can convince you that it's required on a project, I could go to a CEO and say, yeah, you like predictive? This is why you can't have it.
I think because, again, I contract, I bid, I have to compete against my competitors. to win this, meaning I have to have the best features for a very good price. I think the only time that I could do a certain situation is A, if the client called for it, typically they don't, or B, if they came in with enough vagueness in their request for proposal such that all bidders were in a situation that said, this whole project is basically going to be a large proof of concept to get to a certain, we don't know what the final result is, but we're going to have to get to a final result. So whoever gives us the best bid, in that case, I would definitely bid Agile, because I could bid little increments, little pieces as I learn the client's business and as they learn the process. I think in that case, we could do Agile or Adaptive much easier.
Yeah, when you hear creativity, when you hear pilot or sandbox or proof of concept, you can start testing them for their knowledge and experience in things like Scrum and extreme programming and Agile and all those type of things. And you can say, aha, this is where things are going.
And you know, the federal government does this a fair amount. If I'm the federal government and I've got 50 states plus 4 territorial jurisdictions, or however many there are right now, what I might say is we want to try this new policy within this department. But rather than roll it out to all 52 or 54 jurisdictions, I'm going to pick a small state, a territory, and a large state, and we're going to do some pilot projects. We don't know what the end result is, but whatever the end result we come up with then gets rolled out to the other states and territories. A situation like that is perfect for an adaptive process.
Well, yeah, and you know what? It's smart.
Yeah,
it's the way grocery stores work too, you know, or fast food restaurant chains. Let's try it over here, see what happens.
it just reminded me, we're going to take our annual vacation to Hawaii, and over in McDonald's they have something called Sai Min, which is a local Hawaiian dish. I don't see Sai Min in any McDonald's anywhere else except in Hawaii. Yeah. So they may have tried it there and it works beautifully because that's one of their staples. But exactly. Sai Min wouldn't fly in where we live.
Exactly. And as we get more and more mature clients and consumers, even with the state and local government, as our user base gets more knowledgeable and more mature, we have to be much more precise in how we can develop what is going to support their interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, your question just spurred me to another example, or another, because I was really frustrated with my bank earlier this month. And I was thinking about, I'm going to show those people, I'm going to move my business to another bank. But here's what's happened over the years. Incrementally, the checking account, the savings account, the automated payments to my utility people, the attachment to my debit card, the attachment to my mutual fund, all of these things. So if I had to move from that bank to another bank, I'd have to unravel all of that. That didn't happen as one huge project on their behalf. That happened over years. And now I'm basically tied to them because I have to come up with the idea that my frustration is less of a problem for me than if I had to unravel everything and move to another bank. So
oh yeah,
just in something like that, you think about that the agile process, the incremental process has caught me, and now I'm there.
Well, exactly. And think about the centralization and standardization of data within a corporation. There's no corporate policy that says we're going to manage your data and we're going to make it really easy for you to allocate the space you need for your data growth over the next 15 years. That wasn't even a discussion. All of a sudden realize that the wealth of your corporation is sitting by these $100 boxes at the admin's feet all over the corporation. And that was built through cultural experience. It wasn't complacency. They were solving day-to-day problems. And so oftentimes when you come in to help them solve the big problem, it's the culmination of thousands of little problems being solved in a logical manner. But when they get together it creates a kludge that is going to take years to unravel.
I've been in one of those situations where one analyst had a box at their feet and they used Excel, another person used Lotus, another person used something else.
Oh yeah.
Bring all that together in one place.
Oh boy. And you know, back in the early to mid 90s, it was great. Everything was the same. Everybody had a login. You could control access and readability, very simple. But now the world is heterogeneous and it takes advantage of that. And we can't put that genie back in the bottle. So again, we need this bridge that says, here's predictive to get things in place and make sure they're consistent, exactly what we want. But we have all these million endpoints at the end of our network, and we need to have them interact, and we don't have a single tool to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes that's okay. I've been in situations where, for example, all of these new reporting processes, I can teach an end user how to use Crystal reports or some of these very intuitive reporting processes, where all I have to do is take the raw data from the system that I've built for them and allow them to do their analysis, which is completely ad hoc, just by dumping it into a area where they can apply an intuitive reporting tool. So in a case like that, I'm okay with it being so distributed and so fragmented, because I'm still controlling from a corporate perspective what that data looks like and how that data is housed. But how they want to fragment it and use it for their very own requirements is fine by me.
It's the very environment and culture of business and our world that we're working within that's defining the need to become more and more adaptive.
Yeah. And if we can allow our clients that adaptive ability to be able to solve their own problems in certain cases, then I'm all for that, because now I'm not taking an expensive IT resource to write a report, for example.
So taking everything we've talked about for the last 50 minutes, let's sort of try to start bringing it back into one central point. My favorite point is, I talked to 450 new and growing project managers a month. If you were to talk about them about number one, the importance, or number two, how to actually look at this project methodology question at the beginning of the project before the work even starts, what would you advise them on?
I would advise them to spend the time to take the time to plan and get it right. My just as an example, and this is not IT. My wife went in a little while ago for some cataract surgery on her eyes and to put lenses in. The whole procedure takes minutes. The prep takes a long time. Now, if I'm going to trust my future eyesight to a doctor, I want him to prepare as long as he needs to before that laser hits my eye. Take that now into our IT world with projects. For a project manager, take the time, work with your CEO, work with your client, whoever it is, take the time to build that foundation. Do the assessment, do the needs analysis. If you have the time, do a feasibility study with a return on investment. Do the kinds of analysis that you would do during a requirements definition, but do it up front to make sure that your project is on a solid footing.
Yes. And it's not just the technology. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was about the tech because it was changing, it was unstable, and we had to, rely that these new things were going to work the way they were. Now, the emphasis is do I really understand the business and what they really need? Do I understand how they make decisions so I can help them make their decisions efficiently within their infrastructure? And then understanding human behavior and understanding the way you can actually influence and motivate, not to the solution that you know is right, but the solution that consensus says is right.
Well, and let me take you one step further. And that is, if I'm about to give them a whole IT system that's going to completely change their world, the last 2 or 3 projects I've been on, we had a parallel team working alongside us, right from the preparation stage all the way through, that looked at the organization change impacts of the new system and how that's going to change their behavior and the way they're working. And in some cases, that means, do I do a skills gap? When do I do some training? In one situation, I remember a lot of the end users were not very efficient on computers. Yes, they could order their children toys off Amazon, but their regular day job wasn't that way. And so we had to teach them computer skills just to be able to work the new system. So that's part of that whole assessment as well. And as a project manager, your question was, how do we prepare? What do we recommend in terms of this planning? Is to be able to plan all, I think you said it best. It's not just IT. It's just not just technology. It's the entire system.
Yeah, indeed. So, if somebody were to want to talk to you more about this or wanted to ask you a few questions, where would we reach out to you?
Man, for something like this, I'd give them my phone number. This is why we exist as project managers, not just to make sure that our Gantt charts are pretty and we came in on time on budget. This is to be able to change the world of our end users. But in answer to your question, LinkedIn is the absolute best place to get hold of me and have these discussions.
Yeah, and you're right. You're right. We're not dealing with just, acceptance of the deliverable here. We're talking about, are we truly transitioning value? Are we actually solving the problems? Are we working on the right problem or a symptom? And it's so critical to get this right, especially in big projects. And as you can find me out on LinkedIn as well, and we can have ongoing conversations.
And who knows, part of this discussion that we have with whoever gets hold of us may end up in a book that we will be publishing sometime in the near future.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Merv. This is not just fun and educating, but this is inspiring. This is what drives me to wish I was going to have another 40 years in my experience here. I can't imagine what problems and what methodologies we're going to come up with to solve those problems.
Well, I wish I had known half of this when I first started my career. It would have made things a lot easier.
Indeed, indeed.
All right, until next week.
Thanks again, Merv.